Lia Thomas made headlines in March when she became the first openly transgender female to win in a AA Division One swimming event. Now one of Lia's teammates is saying winning feels, quote, tainted, and she's speaking out against the school, the University of Pennsylvania, for silencing Lia's critics. Here's what she told conservative political commentator Matt Walsh.
Feeling of winning doesn't feel as good anymore because it feels tainted. There was a lot of things you couldn't talk about that were very concerning, like a locker room situation. If you even brought up concerns about it, you were transphobic. If you even bring up the fact that Lia swimming might not be fair, you were immediately shut down as being called a hateful person or transphobic.
The teammate spoke to Walsh on condition of anonymity for Walsh's new documentary, What is a Woman? I mean, I don't think we're surprised that there was a lot of backlash, that there was a lot of, I would say, suppression of any sort of, concerns. I think that was pretty expected that there was that going on, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, public opinion is pretty universal as well on this, and so it's not surprising they feel this way on the team. And people who've had to swim against Lia Thomas and just people generally think that, no, or at least from my perspective, no, I don't mean any, maliciousness toward trans women or trans people. I think this helps. Trans people exist and, should be allowed to go through this procedure and are entitled to whatever, to all the same dignity and rights as everybody else. But that in this very specific case, if we're talking just narrowly about the field of athletic competition, it's myopic to think that there isn't an unfair advantage being conferred here at the levels of elite competition. What else can you say? It's just clearly true.
I haven't followed this issue as closely as others. I'm, a left populist who's primarily concerned with the millions of Americans who can't afford food and are facing really high prices at the gas tank.
You say that with a certain amount of contempt.
Well, yeah, because
I think care about this instead.
Look,
of
no,
that.
not that people can care about this, but I do think that it's important to point out how these stories are weaponized to distract from the fact that the GOP has little to nothing to offer to Americans outside of these kind of cultural fights. But look, I think the fundamental issue is that as a society, there was a decision made many hundreds and thousands of years ago to bifurcate women's and men's sports because of an understanding that there are biological differences there, in people's performance ability, muscle capacity, and all of those things. And the reason was to give, women assigned at birth competitors an ability to compete and win and not have to always go against men assigned at birth. And I believe, my understanding is that in the Olympic context, there are certain parameters that trans competitors have to go through in terms of how long do you have to have been transitioning? Are your hormone levels comparable to, the gender assigned at birth people that you are competing against and all those kinds of things? And it seems to have been largely resolved and less of an issue there. I'm not sure what's going on in the Lia Thompson case. There are people who feel both ways on her team, obviously. I'm not sure what the comments about changing rooms are all about. There are in all likelihood lesbian members of the team. The idea of there being like sexual attraction in the locker room, I think, is a kind of a nothing burger. But, ultimately, I don't think this is going anywhere, because I do think we have to grapple with that underlying choice that society made to have this bifurcation in the sports world that is based on some acknowledged differences physically between people who are born assigned at birth male versus women.
Based on the literal differences between men and women, there just are differences. It's not. This is not the gender gets compared to race all the time. Look, there are not fundamental differences between the races the way there actually are differences between men and women. Yeah. There are there's just truth to that. There's differences in preferences that are not that cannot completely be explained by sociological. I cut you off, Kim. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that, I agree that this is one of those battles that I think it's just blown way out of proportion. Though I do think that the Lia Thomas case, I agree. I don't think that she should be competing. I was a swimmer myself my entire life. And so I don't think that she should be competing against the women. She competed as a man for 3 years on the men's team, and then suddenly fairly unsuccessfully. It's still very, very impressive. as an intercollegiate swimmer to make an NCAA team, Division One, even if you're losing every single swim meet. But nonetheless, shouldn't be competing with the women. But I do think that this is a blown way out of proportion. I mean, we don't see really that. This isn't actually affecting everybody's life. I mean, how many trans people do you actually know? How many trans people do you know who are then trying to do things such as compete against you in some sort of sport? Right. I mean, this is like such a tiny, tiny group of people that this is actually affecting. Number of people. Tiny. I mean, hardly anybody is actually affected by this, but this is blown way out of proportion into some giant cultural war issue that is being used as a distraction. And where I disagree with you, Breeze, I don't think it's just the Republicans because they have nothing to offer. I think neither side has anything to offer. They lie to the American people all the time.
That's true. And the flip side is the Democrats use all the flag waving, and we love these groups as the counter. And, I personally think that we should love those groups, but that's also not a policy prescription to actually help those groups that Democrats like to give a lot of lip service to saying they love and support and care about.
And I don't think we should malign. Again, she deserves all the respect and human dignity. I don't, whatever bathroom stuff is really always, I think, very stupid. It is not, I don't want to malign her at all. We're just talking narrowly about whether someone who has had this experience, is it fair for them to compete against other women and it's clearly not. It's just clearly not. And that's just reality.
And I think it feels like most everybody is in agreement with that, but for whatever reason, and kind of what this interview is showing is that actually not everybody. I mean, here we are, we're talking, we all agree with that, and many people agree with that. Yeah. But what's up with the school? Why is the school saying, hush, hush, don't say that?
Because they're beholden to liberal activists. That's what I would say.
So that's the question.
Well, so in an interview with ABC News, Thomas doubled down on competing as a trans woman. Let's watch that.
I knew there would be scrutiny against me if I competed as a woman. I was prepared for that, but I also don't need anybody's permission to be myself and to do the sport that I love.
Well, you don't need anybody's permission to be yourself. I don't think that there's, be you, do whatever you want to do in that regard. But there are things that you should not then, you have to, unfortunately, life is filled with tough choices. And to me, this is one of those tough decisions. Do you want to continue competing as a swimmer at an intercollegiate level, in which case then do so on the men's team as you were for 3 years? Or do you want to transition because that's helping you in a variety of other ways? If that is what you need to do, then do that. But unfortunately, you're going to have to make a sacrifice. And that is you cannot compete in that way anymore. But we do live, I feel like, in a generation of people that just want to have their cake and eat it too. And I know every generation says that about the younger groups. So I sound like an old fogey, but it just sounds like that's what's happening here. Like, why not? Why can't I?
I agree with you completely.
I think what's unfortunate is that so much of this conversation does get turned to non-competitive sports. And, I think it's much less of an issue when there's not prize money or scholarships and things like that at play. And we're talking about, some kid in high school who's being forced to play in one team or another or use a certain kind of locker room that they're not comfortable with and things like that. And it is kind of unfortunate that these niche cases where I do think there's a legitimate discussion to be had about how someone like Lia Thomas is affecting people's kind of settled expectations with respect to scholarship access and prize money and stuff like that. That conversation ends up trickling down and having these negative effects on kids that are just trying to compete in a context that literally costs nobody anything.
I guess, but even at the less competitive level, the difference in athletic ability between men and women, it bifurcates like real quickly, depending on exactly what the sport is.
Pretty sure I can take you in a foot race, Robbie.
We've got a challenge on our hands. I'm certain that you could. You're always shaming me for my unhealthy ways. I'm over here dying in the chair. You're ready to go. I have no doubt that you would beat me. I used to be fast, not anymore, alas, in my old age.
You're like 3 years younger than me.
You're both very young.
All right, we're gonna do the with the rising Olympics sometime. Who wants to bet like Emily Jashinsky beats us at everything
that's
something?
Probably right.
We'll find out she's like a professional javelin.
No one's gonna put any money on Ryan.
I actually think it would be Ryan that wins everything. He's a real competitive guy. I think it would be Ryan.
All right, we'll make sure to set this up for at some point, Rising Olympics. Okay, tomorrow, speaking of Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky, they will be here for Rising Fridays, delivering you the news, not engaged in athletic competition, sadly, but you never know.
Who knows?
Well, specifically, they are going to provide a deep dive into the failed Durham probe, as well as new developments in Pakistan and Yemen.
So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We will see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.